Welcome back to the Midgard Archives. Step into the light and out of the cold. We have spent our previous sessions tracing the jagged edges of the north. We have descended into the rot of the graveyard with the drog, felt the deceptive, hollow-backed pull of the huldra, and heard the drowning, melodic violin of the knackin. We have stood upon the mountain peaks where the trolls turn to granite in the sun, and we have looked into the abyssal, lidless gaze of the kraken, where the land finally gives way to the crushing weight of the sea. But tonight the archives demand that we move beyond the sea and the stone. We are moving into the unheard north in its purest, most lethal, and most ancient form. We are ascending past the treeline, that final border of the living world where the air becomes thin, enough to starve the blood, and the temperature drops low enough to shatter iron like glass. Here, in the shifting, white-out mists of the winter tundra, the boundary between the weather and the will disappears. Before the first guards were carved from the ice, there was only the cold, and within that cold there were the Jötunn, the frost giants. They are not merely creatures, they are the architects of the storm. They are the hunger of the advancing glacier. They are the relentless hunters of the snow. Tonight, we open the files on the beings who believe Midgard is a mistake that only the ice can correct. Chapter 2. The First Breath, Ymir and the Architecture of Chaos. To understand the frost giant is to understand the origin of the world itself, for according to our records, the world is made of their father's remains. In the deepest, most fragile layers of the archives, we find the account of the Ginnungagap, the yawning void that existed before the earth was shaped. To the south was Muspelheim, the realm of fire. To the north was Niflheim, the realm of ice. Where the heat of the south met the frost of the north, the ice began to thaw, and from those primordial droplets, the first being emerged, Ymir. Ymir was not a god. He was a force of pure, unchecked nature. He was an ontological impossibility, of being so immense that the vacuum of space could barely contain his form. The archives describe Ymir not as a man, but as a biological world system. As he slept, the heat from his body produced the first generation of frost giants, known as the Thurs, who crawled from the sweat of his limbs. In the archives, we view the eventual death of Ymir at the hands of Odin and his brothers not as a murder, but as the first act of environmental shielding. The gods were desperate to create order, and to do so, they had to dismantle chaos. They used Ymir's flesh to make the earth, his blood to make the sea, his hair to make the trees, and his skull to make the sky. However, the archives contain a chilling warning. The giants did not die with Ymir. They retreated to the edges of the world, to the fortress of Jötunn. They are the remnants of that primordial chaos, forever seeking to reclaim the materials that were stolen from their father's corpse. When a glacier advances over a village or an avalanche buries a mountain pass, the archives record it as the Jötunn simply taking their bones back. Chapter 3. The Anatomy of a Storm, Composition and Camouflage. The frost giant is the ultimate master of the revealing horror. We must distinguish them from the trolls we have studied previously. While a troll looks like stone because it becomes stone when the sun strikes it, a frost giant looks like a mountain because it is the mountain. In the archived sketches of 17th century explorers, a Jötunn is rarely seen as a distinct anatomical figure. Instead, They are described as a sudden shifting of the horizon, or a mountain that has breathed. Their skin is not flesh in any human sense. It is a permafrost of ancient ice, jagged granite, and frozen moss. Their breath is the fog of the forgotten. A mist so cold it doesn't just chill the skin, it crystallizes the very air inside the lungs. The archives classify them as continental entities. A single frost giant does not hunt a man the way a wolf hunts a deer. It hunts a climate. They move with the pace of a glacier, slow, inevitable, and impossible to stop through physical force. We have records of frozen anomalies where travelers report seeing peaks that were not on their charts the day before. When the wind begins to sound like a low, rhythmic grumble that vibrates the teeth, the archives suggest you are not looking at a landmark. You are looking at a hunter waiting for the sun to go down. Chapter 4. Archived Account. The Lost Expedition of Lapland, 1842. In the winter of 1842, a group of Swedish surveyors went missing in the far north of Lapland. They were well-equipped, experienced men tasked with mapping the unheard regions of the tundra. 6 months later, a single survivor, a man named Isak, was found wandering near a border outpost. His eyes were milky white from snowblindness, and his fingers were black with advanced frostbite. The archives preserve Isak's testimony, which was recorded by a trembling priest in a local church. Isak claimed that the expedition had been tracked by the weather. He described how the mountains seemed to follow them at night. Every time the men woke from their tents, the peaks on the horizon were closer than they had been the evening before. He spoke of the Ice Walker, a Jötunn so tall its head was lost in the swirling storm clouds. Isak's journal, recovered later, contained these final words. It did not run. It simply stepped over the valleys as if they were puddles. It didn't use a club or an axe. It just breathed. It breathed a wind that turned our campfire to a pillar of solid ice in a single second. My friends didn't die of cold. They were integrated into the landscape. One moment they were men. The next they were just blue-tinged statues of ice, their faces frozen in a prayer that the mountain wouldn't hear. The archives note that when search parties finally reached the coordinates Isak described, they found no bodies. They found only 6 new, man-sized pillars of jagged, translucent ice standing in a perfect circle, all facing toward a mountain peak that had seemingly vanished overnight. Chapter 5. Thurs. The Hunger and the Pain. The archives examine the linguistic roots of the giants with great care, for names are the first borderland shields we have. In Old Norse, a common term for these beings was Thurs. This word does not just mean giant in terms of physical size. It translates more accurately to hunger, thirst, or pain. Specifically, it refers to the pain of a dull, constant ache, the kind of ache that comes from being buried alive or frozen in place. This is the psychological core of the Jötunn. They represent the lethal indifference of the tundra. While we have seen the Huldra lure men with lust, or the Naken lure them with the beauty of his violin, the frost giant does not lure at all. It simply exists, and in its existence, the human world is snuffed out. The archives suggest that the fear of the frost giant is the fear of insignificance. To a Jötunn, a human village is no more than an anthill in the path of a winter storm. They do not hate us, they simply do not notice us as they move toward their ancient geological goals. This is the same abyssal indifference we saw in the Kraken, now brought from the sea to the land. Chapter 6. Archived Account. The Village of Silent Wells, 1798. In the regional archives of the Dovrefjell Mountains, there is a record of a village found undisturbed but empty in the spring of 1798. The wells of the village had frozen solid in a single night, not just the surface, but the entire depth of the water, reaching down 50 feet into the earth. The search party found the village elders still sitting at their communal table, spoons still held in their hands. They were not dead in the traditional, biological sense. They were petrified in frost, turned into human-shaped blocks of ice that was harder than diamond. The archives contain a sketch of the village square, where a single massive footprint was found. It was 30 feet long and pressed 6 feet deep into the frozen earth, as if a weight of 1,000 tons had stepped there. The most disturbing detail recorded by the searchers was the sound. They reported that the air in the village vibrated. It was a low-frequency hum that made their teeth ache and their vision blur, a sound the archives now identify as the giant's hum, a vibration caused by the creature's massive internal organs, or perhaps its very heartbeat. The village was abandoned to the ice, and within 10 years, it had been completely reclaimed by the local glacier, as if it had never existed at all. Chapter 7. The Glacier-Minds, Consciousness of the Cold. One of the most controversial theories in the Midgard Archives is that frost giants do not have a mind as we understand it. Instead, they possess what we call a glacier-mind, a consciousness that operates on a time scale of centuries rather than seconds. To a frost giant, a human life is like the flickering of a match in a hurricane. They do not think about their actions. They move according to the pressures of the ice and the pull of the stars. When they attack, it is not an act of war, but a localized weather event. The archives suggest that the Jötunn are the guardians of the world's entropy. They are the force that pulls everything back toward the cold, quiet state of the Ginnungagap. Every time you feel a sudden, inexplicable chill in a warm room, or see a shadow move in a snowstorm, the archives ask you to consider if the Glacier-Mind has finally noticed you. Chapter 8. The Sociological Shield, the Whiteout Defense. Why did our ancestors need the frost giant? Using the lens of the sociological shield, the archives reveal that the Erkine was a necessary personification of the unpredictability of winter. In the 18th and 19th centuries, a sudden whiteout storm was a death sentence for anyone caught in the open. By giving that storm a face, a name, and a history, the survivors could frame their struggle as a war against a titan rather than a random, meaningless tragedy. It was a way to explain why the strongest, most experienced hunters simply vanished, or why entire crops failed in a single night. If a giant stole the warmth, it was a heroic tragedy. If the warmth simply left because of the tilt of the earth, it was a nihilistic void. The frost giant acted as the guardian of the forbiddens, marking the geographical areas where humans were not meant to tread. They were the boundary markers of Midgard, ensuring that the civilization stayed within its borderland shields of fire, iron, and faith. Chapter 9. The Ritual of the Hearth. Fire as a weapon. The archives record that the primary defense against a frost giant was not steel, but the hearth fire. Steel, after all, becomes brittle in the presence of a Jötunn, snapping like a dry twig. A fire was more than a source of physical warmth. It was a spiritual anchor, small piece of the southern realm of Muspelheim, brought into the north to defy the ice. The archives contain accounts of fire watchers in northern villages who are tasked with ensuring the communal flame never went out. They believed that if the flame died, the frost breath of the giant would be invited into the home, turning everyone inside to ice before morning. This is why the archives emphasize the borderland shield of the hearth. Just as iron wards off the trolls, the sustained, flickering light of a human fire wards off the primordial dark of the giant. It is the thin, orange line between a home and a tomb of ice. Chapter 10. Comparative Lore. From Titans to Wendigos. The archives do not view the Jötunn in isolation. We find terrifying parallels in the Titans of Greece and the Wendigo of the Algonquin people. All these entities represent the ancient hunger of the earth, the parts of nature that existed before humanity and will exist long after we're gone. However, the frost giant is unique in its connection to the cyclical nature of time. In the archives of the Völuspá, the giants are the ones who usher in Ragnarök, the final winter of the world. They are the bookends of history. They were there at the beginning to witness the thaw of Ymir, and they will be there at the end to dismantle the world the gods built. They are the patient waiters, knowing that every fire eventually burns out an end of a mountain, eventually crumbles back into ice. Chapter 11. Archived Account. The Log of the Frost Grip, 1802. In the maritime section of the archives, we find the log of a whaling ship named the Frost Grip, which was trapped in the pack ice of the North Atlantic in 1802. The captain's final entries describe a moving glacier that did not follow the currents of the sea. He claimed the glacier had a ribcage and that he could see the frozen hulls of a dozen other missing ships embedded in its side like trophies. The captain wrote, "The ice is singing. It is a sound like glass being crushed by a god's hand. Something is standing on the horizon, and it is taller than the sun. It is waiting for us to stop shivering. It is waiting for the last coal in our stove to go grey. I can feel the giant's hum in the floorboards. We are not sinking. We are being harvested." The frost grip was never found, but the captain's log was discovered inside a sealed iron box on a piece of drifting ice 3 years later. The iron was so cold it burnt the hands of the sailors who found it. Chapter 12. The Architecture of the End. Utgard and the Ice Fortress. The archives speak of a place called Utgard, the stronghold of the giants. It is not a city of stone, but a city of solidified will. In Utgard, everything is an illusion created by the giants to mock the human mind. The legends of Thor's journey to Utgard tell of a giant named Ymir, who was so large that Thor mistook his discarded glove for a massive multi-chambered hall. The archives interpret this not as a tall tale, but as a lesson in perceptual scale. We are so small that we cannot even recognize the architecture of the Jötunn when we are standing inside it. This leads to the most chilling question in the archives. Are our own mountains actually mountains, or are they merely the discarded gloves of beings who have forgotten we exist? Chapter 13. The Alchemical Perspective. Paracelsus and the Elementals. Even in the 16th century, the great alchemist Paracelsus spoke of elementals of the north. His notes, preserved in our scientific shield section, described creatures he called sylphs of the frost. Paracelsus believed that the frost giants were not made of flesh and bone, but of a substance he called absolute cold, a state of matter where all motion has stopped. He theorized that they could not exist in the warmer lands of the south, because their very presence would cause a thermodynamic collapse. They are tethered to the north, just as we are tethered to the sun. Chapter 14. Modern Manifestations. The Glacier Taking. Even today, in the age of satellites and thermal imaging, the archives continue to receive reports of the glacier taking. Glaciologists working in Greenland and Norway sometimes report hearing a rhythmic thud coming from deep inside the eye, a sound that cannot be explained by seismic activity. In 2012, a high-altitude camera captured a cloud formation over the Svalbard archipelago that appeared to have a humanoid shape. The cloud was over 5 miles tall and moved against the prevailing winds for 3 hours before vanishing into a sudden blizzard. The archives suggest that the Jötunn are still here, waiting for the climate to return to the primordial cold they remember. Chapter 15. The Archivist's Journal. Reflections on the Ice. I have spent decades in these archives, surrounded by the warmth of lamps and the smell of old paper. But tonight, as I type these words, I feel a frost on my own fingers that no fire can cure. We like to think we have conquered the world because we have mapped the tundra and named the peaks. But the archives remind us that we are guests in a world that was built from a corpse. We are the match flickers in a hurricane of ice. Every time I look at a map of the North, I see the spaces between the lines, the whiteout regions where the ink won't take. That is where the Jötunn lives. It is the part of our world that remains, and will always remain, unheard. I sometimes wonder if the archives themselves are a kind of way to freeze the monsters in place so they can't reach us, but the ice is patient, and the glacier is always moving. Conclusion. The abyss stares back. The frost giant is the most relentless force we have yet encountered in the Midgard Archives. They cannot be tricked like the Huldra, nor outrun like the Drog, nor petrified like the trolls. They are the inevitable return of the primordial cold. When you hear the wind howl against your window tonight, remember the archives. Remember that the mountain you see on the horizon may not be the same mountain that was there yesterday. The world is much older than our fires, and the ice has a very long memory. Thank you for visiting the Midgard Archives once more. Subscribe to open the archives and stay in the light. Our next entry will move from the frozen tundra into the shifting, twilight mists of the deep caves to find the master of the horde, the Fafnir shadow. But for now, keep your hearth fire burning. The storm is coming, and the Jötunn is already at the door.